Hi, we're out here this morning in beautiful Northumberland Hills. The town of Coburg is directly behind me, and you'll see that there's a huge wide vista. And today I'm going to look at some color mixing. Particularly, there's a lot of green in this. Even though this is early fall, like today is the 4th of October, um, there's not much color change going on in the leaves right now. So there's still a lot of green. So I'm going to look today at some color mixing in plein air and look at some of the do's and don'ts and how to get the best out of your colors. In a previous video, I talked about FTE, which stands for Focus, Thumbnails, and Edit. So here there's a lot of information. I mean, there's a lot of things that you could paint, a lot of things that you could draw. I'm going to pay particular attention to the lake in the background. That's Lake Ontario. The hills to the left of it, and the clump of trees on my right here. I believe those are poplar trees. So I'm going to narrow my focus in significantly, and I'm just going to concentrate on that. And by just, I mean I'm going to give a very impressionistic view of what it is that we have here. So I'm going to start that now as a drawing, and I'll show you some of the thumbnails that I do. Okay, so I spent a few minutes and got set up. I hopefully have the camera in tight enough, and I'm going to start off by doing a couple of thumbnails on the side here. So I'm working on watercolor paper. This is Canson 140 pound watercolor paper, and I'm using my Sharpie pen, and I'm going to draw a couple of thumbnails. So my first thumbnail is going to be looking at in the distance. There's a tree line that comes across and then drops quite significantly and comes across, and behind it is Lake Ontario, and in here there's a couple of fields that come down like this, and another couple of fields that are here, and then on my far right over here I have these trees which are starting to turn a little golden brown. So using one of the rules of composition, I've divided this into a top third, a middle third, and a bottom third. I'm going to cover composition in a later video, but I'm just thinking about that right now. So if I edit this a little bit, what happens if I put this line a little bit further down and I keep more sky, right? So you can write in here little notes to yourself. I'm going to keep more sky. This one here I have about a third sky. This one here I have about 2/3 sky. I wouldn't want to split my page in half, and again we'll talk about composition at a later date. So I'm going to wonder what happens if I do put that in the middle and I draw in, here's my trees on the right, and here's my hills. I think I like this first thumbnail better than these other two, so this is the one I'm going to go for. Okay, so now that I've decided that this is going to be my thumbnail that I'm going to do my painting from, I have to decide, over here, what is the 1/3 mark. So I'm going to probably divide this into thirds like this. I'm not going to put any lines on the actual painted area. I'm just doing this sort of just to help myself out. So one of the things is that right in front of me is a small hill where there's some grass and other just field plants. There's some ragweed and some goldenrod and quite a few other things, hemp and stuff. But I'm going to make that, it's leaning down to the left. So I'm going to do that right now, and I'm just going to put a line going down to the left. And I'm going to double that line up with my black Sharpie. Doubling lines up is something that I do quite often. Again, so we're going to leave about 1/3 sky, so that's about here. On the far right here, like I said earlier, I have a clump of a couple of poplar trees, so I'm going to just indicate sort of where those trunks are going to be. And this is going to be all area that's going to be tree, but I'm going to paint that in rather than draw those trees in. Well, that's my idea right now anyways. A little bit further behind where those poplar trees are, there's another hill that goes significantly downward, and so I'm going to draw that hill going downwards, and this starts to give the viewer the idea that there's I'm on a hill and I'm looking down. On the other side over here, like I said before, there's a hill, and on top of that hill is a significant clump of trees that's sort of going downhill. Back behind where that is, there are some farmers' fields. There's one, and there's another one that also comes down in this direction. And there's a significant tree line across here. Up here, there's also another field, so I'm going to draw in those separations for those fields. So what I'm trying to draw while I'm doing this is I'm just trying to draw where there could be a significant landmark, I guess, is how I'm looking at it. And so back here, again, there's another farmer's field, and I'm going to cover some of this up with the tree, so I might not put all that in. And down here, there's another quite small, well, it looks small, it's probably 20 acres or something, but it looks small from here. I should say that I'm at the top of a hill, but I'm on a road, so if all of a sudden I have to get up and leave, it's because there's a car coming. There's also a couple of other trees that are kind of going down the hill there, but I'm not going to worry about those too much. So that's all I'm going to do, and you'll see that my drawing has turned out, it's significantly more advanced than my thumbnail, but it should be. I spent more time on it, I decided what it was going to be, and you'll see I have sort of these fields that I put in here. This tree on the right, I haven't painted that in yet, but you'll see it's very closely related to that. I've spent more time and I've studied it and I've looked at it to understand where everything is. Of course, Lake Ontario is going to come across right about here, and so I'm going to have to make a decision about how I make this not look like sky. So this that's going to be Lake Ontario is quite a bit darker. Okay, so I'm going to get set up to paint this now. So I'm going to get rid of my Sharpie and I'm going to start laying in some paint. And we're going to look at how we mix colors to better understand the landscape. Okay, it took me a few minutes to get set up here, but I think I'm ready to go now. So what I have with me is number 3 watercolor brush, my Sennelier Impressionist watercolor set and a tissue, and I'm just going to stick the tissue under there until I need it. But on the side here, I'll turn this so you can see it. I have some little wells here that Sennelier wants you to buy new paints and put them into here, or different colors of paints. And I use these for my water. It keeps the amount of spillage down to a minimum, and it's a really useful place to have water instead of having a separate container. So when you're painting in plein air, one of the things that you should always concentrate on is having the least amount of stuff out at any one time. So by just having a board with my paper on it, my paint set, a little bit of water in here, and a one paintbrush and a tissue, that's pretty much the minimum that anyone could have for doing watercolor. So I'm going to stick this tissue, like I said, under here just in case I need it. And I'm going to leave my brush here for a second, and I'm just going to take my water bottle, just a regular water bottle that I take with me, and I'm going to put a little bit of water into one of those wells. And I put a little bit too much in, so I'm going to try to slide it over into another well, and there we go. All right, put the top back on that so I don't spill any, and just set that on the ground. And so when you're painting in plein air, it's kind of good to remember to have different areas painted and let those dry before you go on to the next area. So today what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the sky, and I paint a lot of wet on wet, so I'm going to wet this sky. You know, remember, one of the secrets of watercolor is that the paper is sort of your friend, and the paper will only allow color to go in that area that is currently wet. So I'm going to wet this, get this all pretty wet, and you'll see, even though it's the first week of October, we have an unusually warm day here today, so it's very, very bright out. And it's also, you know, not even 10 o'clock in the morning, it's already about 25 degrees Celsius, so it's pretty warm. Again, I'm just going to wet this where I want the blue sky to be, and I'm going to leave the area that is the lake alone. And so I'm just going to make sure this is good and wet. And since I'm working wet and wet, I'm going to do a test area on the side, and I'm just going to put a little test area like that. And I have some blue paint here from one of my previous paintings, so I'm just going to do that to it and pick up a little bit more. So I'm going to wet this area a little bit, put a little bit of water over here, as much as I can, as much as I think I need for that sky. That's what I'm going to put over here. So I'm just going back to the well and continuing to put a little bit of water over here. And if you touch a dry area on the tin, you'll get more water to come off, just like that. And it's a pretty significant amount of sky, so I'm going to put in quite a bit of water. And I'm going to come back to this and just have a look at this from the side and make sure this is staying wet for me. Like that. Alright, now I'm going to just wet this a little bit and put that color into this. Alright, so I would say this is not very saturated. In other words, there's a very little pigment and a whole lot of water. And I'm going to go to my little test area here, and that's about the color that I want for the sky. And it's not very often that you get it in the first go, but that's sort of the nature of the beast. So I'm going to pick up a significant amount of blue now, and I'm going to put it across, all the way across my sky. And I'm going to put it in a little inconsistent, so I'm not going to put it, I'm not going to paint it all in very harshly. I'm just going to put it in however I think of that sky. Okay, so I'm thinking it's a bright blue day, but there's a lot of white streaks across the sky, those sort of clouds that you get on a very beautiful day, and that's sort of the way that I'm thinking of it. I'm going to dry this, I'm going to rinse this brush off a little bit in that pile, and I'm going to dry it off a little bit, and I might even just take a little bit of that paint right out of there with that to sort of indicate where those are. I'm not trying to mix the paint here, I'm just trying to give an indication of where there might be some white lines in the sky. So now I'm going to go off to another area, and the next area that I'm going to look at is these fields. These fields are all different shades of brown because they're all different type of vegetation that are growing in them. So I'm going to mix up this and see what this is. And I'm going to do a little test here on the side of my page. And this is a little bit dirty compared to what it is that I'm really looking for. I'm kind of looking for a golden kind of a brown. And right beside this on my tray is a little bit of yellow. So what happens when I mix those two together? Do I get, it's a little bit more golden. I think I could have it, it's a little bit too greeny for me, and that's not really the way that I see these fields across there. So I'm going to go to my Sennelier yellow, and I'm going to pick up a little bit of yellow on my brush and mix it into this. And that's pretty much the color that I'm looking for, this mustard kind of a color. And I'm going to test that on the side of my page, and that is kind of what I'm looking for. So there's one field here that comes down like this and across. And that's it. That's sort of the color that I'm looking for. And the field right beside that is slightly that color, but slightly browner. But there's another field in this painting that is that color. And so I'm going to take that and I'm going to paint it into this. And I'm going to be careful not to touch the blue from the sky there. All right. There's one more field that is this color, and it's this one here. So I'm going to just put a little bit into that. There's a little bit more of this here, just sort of as a hump. Of course, all through here where these fields are that are very close to me, there's a lot of that yellow, and I'll get to that in a minute. But I want to lay in some green across here. There's some hills that are going down, and there's some green over here. So I'm going to start with a dark green. So I'm going to rinse this brush off in this little well right here, and you'll see my water's getting pretty mucky, but that's okay. For me, I like that muck. I'm going to use that as my underpainting for this particular field right across here, all this green. And I'm also going to use it on part of this. So I'm just going to wet this all across here, like this. And I might even wet a little bit of this. And like I said, I'm going to mix up some dark green. So over here I have some light green. I'm going to mix this up. I'm going to put a generous amount of water in this. And I'm going to grab a little bit of blue. just a little bit of blue. And I'm going to put that blue into this green. And we have a dark sort of forest green. But our underpainting over here was all this sort of very light muddied water, and so it's going to give us a slightly different effect because we already have some light green underpainting, and I'm picking up quite a bit of water here, so I'm working very wet here at this point. And I made a little mistake here where my dark green has gone into that field, and I don't really want that, so I'm going to take my tissue and I'm just going to take that out. I'm going to re-wet this area, and that's that. So this area up in here is a lot of trees, but a lot of different colored trees. I just want this green to be the basis of that. Again, I'm going to grab my dark, dirty green water here, and I'm going to wet that. Now I'm going to go back to some of these fields here in just a second, but you can see my green from here has started to leak into my blue, and that's not really what I'm going for here, so I'm going to take that right out. And I'm going to tip my page down this way a little bit. There's a car coming right up here behind me, so I might have to stop filming in a second. You never know. Alright, so I'm going to put in some lighter green across there, and I'm just going to let that all sort of bleed together there and see what I get. I'm going to come back into this with some of this, again, this is just dirty green water, and I'm going to pick up a little bit of paint with my dirty water and just let that flow together like that. Pick up a little paint with the dirty water again, and this is just flowing in there, and that's kind of what it is that I'm going for here. So this dirty water seems to be doing the trick for me. I'm going to paint in some more of this. So you'll see this water is very, very dirty. It's almost the color of paint, almost the consistency of paint now. So this is very dirty green water, but we're going to let that just bleed together. It seems to be working, so don't fight it. You know, goodness gracious, if you find something in painting that's working for you, really don't fight it. My blue of my sky is still not dry along there, so I'm going to give this painting a couple of minutes, and I'm just going to put a little bit more in here. I'm going to give this painting a couple of minutes here. I'm going to underpaint this a little bit, and I think I'm going to underpaint this a little bit. Again, this is dirty water that I'm underpainting with, so. And I'm going to just put in a little bit more here like this. And I'm going to leave this, and I'm going to come back in a few minutes after this is all dried, and we'll do a little bit more. So maybe at this point I'm looking to paint in this area here, so I don't want this sky at all to be wet. So I'm going to leave it until that sky is dry. All right, and then I'll come back and show you some more. I'm probably going to change my water too. All right, so we're back here, and this is all dry now. It's been about 15 minutes, I guess, but it's all pretty dry. And I cleaned out my water with my tissue so I can get some fresh water. And again, I'm just going to get my water bottle, and I'm going to dump out just a very little bit of water in one of those wells. And I'm actually going to go to another well too, and just in case I need some more, and do that up, put it back down. And again, I'm sitting on the road, so on the edge of the road. I shouldn't say I'm sitting on the road. So we're going to paint in this piece right here that is Lake Ontario. And I'm just going to raise my board up a little bit here. And again, we're going to work sort of wet, and this is very, very dry now. So I'm going to wet my brush, rinse it off a little bit, take some of that green out of it. Pick up some fresh water here. And I'm just going to paint this straight across just where I want the lake to be. Straight across there, and just sort of lean your head over and make sure you got everything covered that you want to have covered. And then I'm going to wet this blue again. But the blue that we're going to put on now is going to be, you know, more intense than this. We want this to be a little bit darker. So I'm going to grab up a significant amount of blue on my number 3 brush here and mix it into that. And I'm going to try it on the page before I put it on. And that's a little too intense and a little too thick for me. So I'm going to just pick up a little bit more water and put some more water into this. And have another go at this. Still a little bit too intense for me. Pick up a little bit more water. I think that's more along the lines of what it is that I'm going for. So it's important that we test the color every time before we just put it to the page. So I think with the water that I have on here and this little bit less intense, if this is getting close to what it is that I want, so I'm just going to put a little bit more water in there and then try this one more time. That's what I'm looking for. So I'm going to just put this in. I'm going to paint it across the top. And the water is very consistent from one side to the other, just like that. And I'm going to put a little bit more color in there for that water, just like that. Okay, so the other thing that we have to paint now is this tree line and a little bit in these other tree lines here, which I want to be sort of very dark green. So I'm going to mix up this green here. I'm going to wet this significantly, and I'm going to pick up this blue, and I'm going to put this blue into this and give that a little try. Not really. Let's see if I can pick up this blue. That's the color right there that I'm looking for. So although I didn't mix it in the tin, I used this blue that was still wet here and put it together with my green, and I got the color that I was looking for. So I'm going to put this in here fairly dry. So this technique is, of course, this is dry on dry, and I'm going to try to move my arm out of the way so you can see what I'm painting here. And we're going to put in here a little bit of this and a little bit of this, like that. And I'm going to pick up a little bit of water, just mix that together a little bit. And again, we're just going to put this in here, and that's sort of what it is that I'm looking for. Now, in this field here that's directly in front of us, there's a significant amount of yellow plants, and I want this to look like it's a little bit close to us, so I'm going to wet some of this, you know, just sort of sparsely. I'm going to wet it. I'm not going to wet the whole thing, and I'm not going to wet it in any kind of consistent manner. I'm just wetting it, you know, very sparsely. I'm going to pick up some of this golden yellow that we had here before. It's a little bit green now, so I'm going to pick up some color, a little bit of yellow, and mix it into this green. A little bit more yellow and mix it into this green, and a little wee bit more yellow, mix it into that. Pick up some water and see what color we have. So it's a little, it's a light green. It's not quite the yellow that I was looking for, but that's okay. We can use this. I'm just gonna sparsely, you'll see I'm just touching the page very quickly, not very methodically. There could be maybe a little bit of this greeny yellow in throughout some of these trees here. And again, I'm just going to pick up some of this, let that sit on there. I'm going to take a little bit more water, put a little bit more water into here, and I'm going to grab up some straight yellow. So this is just yellow, and water it down a little bit, water it down a little bit more. That's what I'm looking for. And again, I'm just going to very sparsely, I'm just sort of stippling the color onto those wet areas, just like that. And that's all I'm really looking for there. Pick up a little bit more yellow and just in there, and that's pretty much all I'm going to do with that. So I had set up here earlier an area where I was going to put in these trees, and I'm still going to do that. And one of the things that I'm going to do to prepare to do that is I'm going to take a little bit of this blue off, just like that. Just take my tissue and just take a little bit of that blue off. And I'm going to put a little underpainting in here, so I'm going to wet this with sort of my yellowy kind of water, just like that. Use a little bit of that yellow water in here too. Yellow water. That yellowy, you know, sort of muddy water gives a good highlight to some areas. And again, you'll see here, I'm working very sparingly. I'm not putting a lot of color on. Just letting the colors blend together. Maybe take some off with your tissue here or there. You know, not, I don't work super dark when it comes to watercolor. I sort of let the pen line be the darkness, if you will. So again, I'm going to just wet this a little bit more here. And I'm going to leave this now again for maybe another 5 or 10 minutes until this all starts to dry up. All right, so I'm back, and it's been about maybe 10 minutes for that to dry up. But my water turned out pretty good, so you can see a difference between the water and the sky. And I was afraid that this was going to get a little bit too mucky because I kind of got in there with the brush and was trying to fix it. But then I took a lot of the color out, and I just used my tissue and dabbed it out, and it seems to work out all right. So I'm just going to grab my paint set here again, and I want to put in sort of a couple of small trees, and I'm just painting this in sort of very lightly to give my idea of where this is going to be. It's going to be on the right, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to just wet this whole area. Again, this is that yellowy kind of that yellowy dirty water. going to wet this whole area. I'm going to wet it fairly well. And then I'm going to take a clean piece of my tissue, which I'm running out of clean pieces of tissue. And I'm just going to let that soak in there for a second. And then I'm going to try to take a little bit of that color out. Alright, and I think I probably took a little bit of it out. Well, you can see there's some on the tissue. So again, I'm going to wet this area that I want to be tree. And my paint is only going to go in this area that is tree. And this tree is sort of golden, I would say it's a golden brown. It has a little bit of green left in it, but the predominant color is golden brown, much what I have right here. And let's see if we try this on the page. That's pretty much what I'm going for. So I have this green under painting. I wet the page with green, and I'm just going to put this, just going to do that. Just sort of stipple this in. Right over top of that. And you could say, okay, there's a little bit of brown in there too, so you could pick up a little bit of this, sort of dirty brown on the page, and just very lightly put that into, very lightly put that into that golden brown, like this. And again, that's it. You don't really want to muck around with this too much. So that's sort of my trees on the right. I'm not going to do too much more to this because I really don't, I really think there's a huge opportunity at this point to screw this up very badly. So put a little bit of green in between those two trees there. Take this out a little bit. Again, just a little bit of color in between those trees. And that's it. So again, in this painting, I really just wanted to demonstrate the idea of mixing and then testing our colors on the side. You'll see there's really no red in this painting. It didn't come out with any red at all. If you wanted to put red into this, I would suggest that the red went into the trees or into some of these fields maybe a little bit. But in general, there's really no red in this. It's a lot of yellow and green and blue sky and blue lake. So I'm going to leave it at that. I hope you picked up a tip or trick, and please follow along. All the links to all the products that I used are going to be in the description below. And if you want to check out all the videos that I put online, please click follow and follow along and see what I do in the future. Thanks for stopping by and having a look.